Joining us now to discuss the latest from the Middle East is Kervin Aucoin, former lead ISR of the U.S. Army and host of This Week Explained, the podcast. Kervin, thank you for joining us. Still no retaliation from Israel on Iran. Are you still expecting one?
Yeah, definitely. There were some, and first of all, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be on here. First of all, there were some discussions within Israel that they would retaliate on the anniversary of the attack from Hamas, which that was yesterday. But there was a lot of pressure, especially on Benjamin Netanyahu, to use that day as a day of mourning and a day for calls to release all the hostages that were kidnapped during that time frame. So they've delayed it a little bit. There is absolutely within probably this week going to be a retaliation from Israel onto Iran. So that begs the question, what is that going to look like? There was some talks of Israel wanting to hit nuclear sites in Iran. I think those are very much in play, but that's not the first wave of attacks we're going to see. I think it'd be very smart if Israel targets their military sites first before hitting their oil refineries, and then ratcheting up those engagements as Iran sort of retaliates for all of that.
All right, Kervin, is there any sort of possibility that Israel chooses not to retaliate in order to keep some of its allies that have been calling for a ceasefire happy?
There's a very slight chance. It's below 20% in my mind, because Israel, just as I've said with Iran, when they had to retaliate, even though they delayed for so long before their retaliation, especially right now in a volatile Middle East, you cannot be perceived as weak. Your government can't be perceived as weak, and your military can't be perceived as weak. Right now, Israel's taking the fight to Hezbollah. They have started that ground incursion into the southern portion of Lebanon to take the fight to Hezbollah. But the fight is really with Iran right now, and they're going to have to retaliate. They're going to have to do something that strikes Iran, and possibly in a way that, as they've said, a way that has never happened before in the history of the Middle East.
Okay, and keeping on that note of Hezbollah, what is the strategic significance here as we're seeing this expanded ground operation that Israel's got in Lebanon right now?
Well, I mean, it's been an incredible timeline, right? So we had the pager attacks, the walkie-talkie attacks, and then from that led to Hezbollah leadership having to meet in person. As they met in person, we saw targeted strikes from Israel onto Hezbollah leadership that has killed the leader of Hezbollah. Israel has now said that they have also killed each subsequent leader that was supposed to take over for Hezbollah. Now they've struck and killed another key Hezbollah leader. This was someone who was very active in the arms transfer and getting arms to Hezbollah. And then as they're doing all these targeted strikes on leadership, disrupting their command and control, disrupting their leadership, they're taking the fight on the ground. They're getting into Lebanon. And honestly, they're doing something the UN and even the U.S. Refused to do, which is push Hezbollah outside of what was supposed to be a blue zone, push them out of there so that they can no longer use their rockets to strike indiscriminately in these portions of northern Israel.
All right, and maybe as a result of Israel's tactics here, you could comment on that. Hezbollah, we do have some news about that. Hezbollah's Deputy Secretary General, as reported by CNN, is now supporting talks for a ceasefire by Lebanon's parliament speaker. And I mean, this is obviously not the stance they had before. Before, they had been saying that they would only stop firing and maybe discuss a ceasefire if there is a ceasefire in Gaza. Your take on this?
Yeah, it's definitely pressure from leadership in Iran telling Hezbollah to please agree to this ceasefire, maybe prevent an attack from Israel. But on the flip side of that, Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel has said they're not going to accept a ceasefire until their goal in that southern portion of Lebanon is complete. That goal is the complete annihilation of the terrorist group that is Hezbollah.
And now moving on to the United States, we just saw that Vice President Kamala Harris, obviously who's running for the presidency now, she said that Iran is the greatest adversary to the U.S. right now. So what is the United States watching most closely in the Middle East right now?
Oh, yeah, they're definitely watching Iran. Look, we have U.S. forces in the Middle East. Any extreme retaliation from Israel on Iran could cause Iran to push its proxies, like the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah, Hamas, to attack more on U.S. service members that are there, possibly killing U.S. service members. So yeah, the U.S. the Biden administration, they're very worried. But to say that Iran is the biggest threat to the United States is glossing over the fact that the biggest threat to the United States, and this is over the last 4 years, has been, this is from the intelligence community, it is and it will be the Chinese Communist Party. They are economically, militarily, governmental, they are the biggest threat to the United States.
I like that you bring up this threat from China right now. What role is China playing in the Middle Eastern conflict right now?
Well, it's quite interesting because we're kind of seeing the alliances shore up. Russia and Iran are sending weapons to each other, and China, who's out, as far as they're publicly stating, they want an end to this conflict in the Middle East, but really behind the scenes, they're supporting Iran. They're part of an axis of resistance that Iran has set up right now. While they're not actively pushing weapons to Iran, like I said, behind the scenes, they're telling Iran that you could keep doing what you're doing. We'll have your back if something does happen in the Middle East. We will support you, whether that's financially. It won't be militarily, but if it's financially or with weapons, or forcing North Korea to provide weapons to Iran, those are things that we could see in the coming months.
I've spoken to multiple analysts who all bring up this issue with the China threat right now. Clearly a front that we have to keep a close eye on. Now, another interesting development here, Israel's defense minister is postponing his trip to Washington, D.C. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so he was supposed to come to DC, where I'm located, and talk to the president and ask for more munitions, ask for more support from the United States. Benjamin Netanyahu told him to postpone that because Benjamin Netanyahu wants to talk to him and sort of set down the rules for this conversation with the Biden administration. I think they believe this is the last conversation they can have in person with this administration before U.S. elections. And then whoever wins those U.S. elections, we were going to see either the same path that we're on right now, or maybe a divergence with the new administration.
Kervin, really quick before we go here, where do you see the next turning point in this conflict?
It's definitely going to be the retaliation that Israel does. So if Israel is honest and what they're saying publicly is true, and this is the biggest retaliation that the Middle East has ever seen, Iran is going to have to retaliate to that. And now we're having an escalation of tit for tat, and we're in a regional war now. There's going to be a wide scale war in the Middle East, and that is going to involve U.S. service members who are deployed there.
So much to look out for, and all just 28 days from the U.S. presidential election. Thank you, Kervin Aucoin, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.